Did you know that less than 80 years ago, a full-scale battle, complete with artillery, aircraft, and thousands of soldiers, was fought right here on Canadian soil? It's a conflict most history books barely mention, a forgotten war fought against a brutal enemy, not in Europe or the Pacific, but in the remote, icy islands of Alaska. This is the story of the Battle of the Aleutian Islands, Canada's forgotten war. It all began on June 3, 1942. Just 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces launched a surprise attack, not on Hawaii or California, but on Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands, a part of Alaska. This wasn't just a raid, it was an invasion. A few days later, Japanese troops landed and occupied 2 American islands, Attu and Kiska. For the first time since the War of 1812, an enemy force had seized North American territory. Panic rippled down the West Coast. Suddenly, the threat of invasion felt terrifyingly real. People in British Columbia and Washington state blacked out their windows at night, fearing Japanese bombers could appear at any moment. The Canadian government knew it had to act. This wasn't just America's problem. This was a direct threat to Canada's own doorstep. The defense of North America was now a shared battle. In response, Canada launched its largest and most secretive military deployment of the war on home soil. Thousands of Canadian soldiers, many of them young conscripts, were sent north. The Royal Canadian Air Force established new bases, flying constant patrols over the frigid North Pacific, hunting for Japanese submarines and ships. The Royal Canadian Navy joined American vessels, creating a naval blockade to cut off the Japanese-held islands. The conditions were absolutely brutal. The Aleutians are known for some of the worst weather on Earth. Soldiers called it the birthplace of the winds. They faced constant freezing rain, dense fog that could ground aircraft for weeks, and sudden violent storms known as willy-waws, with winds exceeding 160 kilometers per hour. Frostbite and trench foot were as much an enemy as the Japanese. It was a miserable, demoralizing environment, a constant battle against nature itself. The mission was to retake the islands, one by one. The first target was Attu. In May 1943, a combined American and Canadian force prepared to land. However, at the last minute, the Canadian troops were held in reserve. American soldiers went ashore and were met with ferocious resistance. The Japanese defenders, outnumbered and cut off, fought to the last man in one of the most savage battles of the Pacific War. The fighting was horrific, and the casualty rates were staggering, second only to Iwo Jima in terms of percentage. After the brutal fight for Attu, all eyes turned to the last enemy stronghold, Kiska. This time, the Canadians would be front and center. Operation Cottage was launched, a massive joint invasion force. Over 5,000 Canadian soldiers from the 13th Infantry Brigade, many of whom had never seen combat, joined 30,000 American troops. It was the first time Canadian conscripts were sent into a combat zone in World War II. On August 15, 1943, under the cover of a dense Aleutian fog, the invasion of Kiska began. The naval bombardment was immense. Ships pounded the island for days. As the landing craft hit the beaches, the Canadian and American soldiers stormed ashore, expecting a bloodbath similar to Attu. They advanced cautiously through the fog and mud, their nerves on edge, ready for a fight to the death. They charged up the hills, they cleared out trenches, they braced for ambushes at every turn. But something was strange. There was no return fire, no machine guns, no mortar shells, no banzai charges. The island was eerily silent, except for the sounds of their own troops and the howling wind. For days they swept across the island, finding abandoned barracks, empty gun emplacements, and supplies. They even found a few stray dogs left behind. But there were no Japanese soldiers. It was a ghost island. The entire Japanese garrison, over 5,000 men, had vanished. So, what happened? It turned out to be one of the most brilliant and daring evacuations of the war. Under the cover of the thick Aleutian fog, the Japanese Navy had slipped through the Allied naval blockade just 2 weeks earlier and rescued their entire force in less than an hour. The Allies had been bombing and shelling an empty island for weeks. The invasion of Kiska, the battle that never was, became a source of some embarrassment. The press nicknamed it the biggest military blunder since Custer's last stand. But the silence of the island didn't mean it was without danger. In the confusion and thick fog, friendly fire incidents occurred. Dozens of Allied soldiers were killed or wounded by their own comrades. Mines and booby traps left behind by the Japanese also claimed lives. By the time the island was declared secure, over 300 Allied casualties were recorded, all without a single enemy soldier present. For the Canadian soldiers, it was a bizarre and anticlimactic end to a grueling campaign. They had trained for a deadly battle, endured the horrific weather, and faced the fear of combat, only to find an empty battlefield. Yet, their contribution was vital. The presence of thousands of Canadian troops was a critical part of the Allied strategy that forced the Japanese to abandon their foothold in North America. They helped secure our continent from a very real threat. After the Aleutian campaign, the story quickly faded from public memory. The epic battles in Europe and the Pacific rightfully captured the world's attention. But for the thousands of Canadians who served in that forgotten corner of the world, it was a defining, difficult, and sometimes deadly experience. They battled the elements and a ghost enemy, standing guard on the front line of North America. So the next time you think of Canada's role in World War II, remember the Aleutians. Remember the soldiers who fought the wind, the rain, and the fog in our continent's defense. It's a crucial, forgotten chapter of our own history, a war fought and won right here on our own soil. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into forgotten history. See you in the next video.